The risk of a Taiwan invasion. The deliberation over Operation Causeway still holds true today. The Chinese sent 3 Coast Guard ships into the Taiwanese territorial waters, where they stayed for about an hour this week, and was another example of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, ignoring Taiwan's sovereignty as it continues to turn up hostility towards what it views as a breakaway province. The leadership in Beijing are not ambiguous about their intent towards Taiwan and publicly state that Taiwan will be reunited under the control of mainland China. China's decades-long military buildup at this point is focused on the recapturing of Taiwan and having a military peer capability with the United States to repel any response from it or its allies coming to the assistance of Taiwan. Many in the Western press, analysts, and politicians assume an invasion of Taiwan is not a question of if, but when. But despite intent, is the invasion option the best or first option for China? The elimination of Taiwan is a political dream of the CCP to finally eliminate the last vestiges of the Kuomintang that retreated to the island of Formosa after being defeated by the People's Liberation Army in 1949 in the Chinese Civil War. Outside of the political satisfaction and the legacy it would give President Xi Jinping, awarding him the accolades that eluded Mao Zedong, there are advantages that the taking of Taiwan would bestow China. The first is that the technology that Taiwan has creates 92% of the world's advanced computer chips and 18% of the world's semiconductors. China taking possession of this asset or denying it to the rest of the world would elevate China's stature in a technology-hungry world. Militarily, seizing of Taiwan would allow China to break into the first island chain, which is a chain of islands that extends from the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia to the Malay Peninsula. The breaking into the first island chain would mean that the People's Liberation Army Air Force, the PLAAF, would be able to deploy in Taiwan and would be able to extend its primary air coverage across the entire South China Sea, allowing it to enforce its internationally illegal claims of the 9-dash line. This would allow the People's Liberation Army Air Force to operate over the Philippines if it chooses, and allow it to operate further out and cover the approaches of the Western Pacific, which is one of the directions of the U.S. Navy to approach. This would also relieve the pressure on the People's Liberation Army Navy, since it would not have to operate in the Western Pacific without air cover, since its Navy is still learning to handle aircraft carriers. With all the advantages of the CCP and the personal laureates that would be bestowed to the ambitious Xi Jinping, it would seem that the launching of the operation to take Taiwan would be an easy decision. The U.S. during World War II developed a plan to invade Formosa, now Taiwan, called Operation Causeway. The plan was supported by the chiefs of the Naval Operations Admiral Ernest King and had the tepid support of the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, in that Formosa could be used to keep China in the war against Japan, but more importantly, it could be a large staging base to launch operations against the Japanese homeland. The operation was opposed by the Commander-in-Chief of the Southwest Pacific area, General Douglas MacArthur, and the Commander of the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Raymond Spruance, due to the operation was going to be resource-intensive by requiring a landing of an estimated 500,000 Marines and soldiers to take the island in what was expected to be a native population that would be hostile to the U.S., and the relative short window to operate around the island effectively. This will still be relevant to China, and the U.S. in World War II was very experienced in conducting amphibious operations, where the CCP is not. Another reason that Operation Causeway is still relevant to the modern times is that it was about conducting amphibious assaults as part of a doctrine called forcible entry operations, which have not changed between 1944 and 2024. China's doctrine and apparent naval buildup, including troop landing ships and crafts, is about forcing entry into the island and supporting a campaign to physically land on the island that, from execution to logistics, is very much like that what was envisioned by Causeway. China would also be encountering the same hostile defenses and population that the U.S. was expecting, that it would not only require a landing of a large force to take the island, but a large force to occupy it as well. Causeway was envisioning landing on the southern tip of Formosa and the islands in the Taiwan Straits, so it would mean that the U.S. Navy foresaw operating in the same waters that China would need to operate in conducting the invasion. The U.S. was expecting a 27-day operation, but in hindsight, that was probably an optimistic estimate since it took 36 days to take Iwo and 80 days to take Okinawa, and Taiwan is a much bigger island than either of those examples. The reason that the days to take the islands are important is because the U.S. Navy estimated that operating in the Taiwan Straits was risky for most of the year, with only March through April and September through October giving favorable weather conditions to operate an invasion and the logistics follow-on. China would have to contend with the same issue, as it would be assumed it would have to conduct amphibious and logistics operations across the strait with the relatively same small window. The PLA personnel and doctrine are not battle-tested and it has not conducted a significant military operation since 1979 against Vietnam, and that did not go well for the PLA. The People's Liberation Army and People's Liberation Army Navy would have to conduct an operation in a relatively short window against what is expected to be determined resistance from the Taiwanese, and that does not include the other combatants such as the U.S., Japan, possibly the Philippines, Australia, United Kingdom, France. China would be somewhat supported in that its main bases on mainland China to support the invasion would have been shorter than Causeway, but that may not be enough to compensate for the untested military conducting a complex amphibious operation against what would be strong resistance within and around Taiwan. China can also be expected to not only have to fight Taiwan, but it expects attacks from the north, south, and west from the U.S. and its allies. The Taiwanese also have the capability to use missiles to attack Chinese mainland as well, and this could include an attack on the Three Gorges Dam that could impact 30% of the Chinese population, but a successful attack on the giant dam can be expected to cause significant retaliatory response against civilian targets that could include a nuclear response. The risk of a loss, even without the attack on the Three Gorges Dam by the Chinese, could be destabilizing to its society and would weaken the hold of the Chinese Communist Party over that society. It could be expected that Xi Jinping and his allies would lose face and would lose their hold on the CCP. Considering all the risks that a forcible entry amphibious operation entails, is this the best way for the CCP to attain its goals in Taiwan? There are better options available to reunifying with Taiwan that do not have the downside risk that threatens the CCP's hold on power if it fails. The question is the threat of an invasion, just that the question is the threat of an invasion just that, or part of a gray zone tactics, or is it an option of last resort? If an invasion of the island is the preferred method with all the risk, why would the CCP risk it? Is there some factors inside China that pushes the risky option as the first option? Is there such a factor such as the maniacal leader who wants a legacy to cemented while he's still alive, or an economic or demographic time bomb that could be so significant that it also destabilizes society? It would be a worthwhile endeavor to find out that reason.